Welcome back to Mountain Home Stories, our cozy reading corner. Thank you all so much for the beautiful response to Heidi's arrival in our last episode. Today we return to the quiet peace of Swiss Alps for episode 2. Make sure you are settled in comfortably because our journey up the mountain continues right now. When we last left our bright-hearted little girl, she had completely fallen in love with her new home, sleeping high up in the fresh hayloft, drinking fresh milk, and exploring the high sunlit pastures with Peter and the goats. Her grumpy grandfather's cold heart has already begun to soften under her joyful spirit. But as autumn fades and the fierce winter snows lock the cabin away from the rest of the world, Heidi is about to venture down the mountain to bring a wonderful burst of light into a dark, lonely cottage. Let us start the story. Chapter 4. Shooting Down the Mountainside. The next morning, the sun came out early as bright as ever, and then Peter appeared with the goats. And again the two children climbed up together to the high meadows. And so it went on day after day till Heidi, passing her life thus among the grass and flowers, was burnt brown with the sun, and grew so strong and healthy that nothing ever ailed her. She was happy too, and lived from day to day as free and light-hearted as the little birds that make their home among the green forest trees. Then the autumn came, and the wind blew louder and stronger, and the grandfather would say sometimes, "Today you must stay at home, Heidi. A sudden gust of the wind would blow a little thing like you over the rocks into the valley below in a moment." Whenever Peter heard that he must go alone, he looked very unhappy, for he saw nothing but mishaps of all kinds ahead, and did not know how he should bear the long, dull day without Heidi. Then, too, there was the good meal he would miss, and besides that, the goats on these days were so naughty and obstinate that he had twice the usual trouble with them, for they had grown so accustomed to Heidi's presence that they would run in every direction and refuse to go on unless she was with them. Heidi was never unhappy, for wherever she was, she found something to interest or amuse her. She liked best, it is true, to go out with Peter up to the flowers and the great bird, but she also found her grandfather's hammering and sawing and carpentering very entertaining. And if it should chance to be the day when the large round goat's milk cheese was made, she enjoyed beyond measure watching her grandfather stir the great cauldron. The thing which attracted her most, however, was the waving and roaring of the 3 old fir trees on these windy days. She would stand underneath them and look up, unable to tear herself away, looking and listening while they bowed and swayed and roared as the mighty wind rushed through them. There was no longer now the warm, bright sun that had shone all through the summer. So Heidi went to the cupboard and got out her shoes and stockings and dress. Then it grew very cold, and Peter would come up early in the morning, blowing on his fingers to keep them warm. But he soon left off coming, for one night there was a heavy fall of snow, and the next morning the whole mountain was covered with it, and not a single little green leaf even was to be seen anywhere upon it. There was no Peter that day, and Heidi stood at the little window looking out in wonderment, for the snow was beginning again, and the thick flakes kept falling till the snow was up to the window, and still they continued to fall. And the snow grew higher, so that at last the window could not be opened, and she and her grandfather were shut up fast within the hut. Heidi thought this was great fun and ran from one window to the other. The next day, the snow having ceased, the grandfather went out and shoveled it away from the house, and threw it into such great heaps that they looked like mountains. Heidi and her grandfather were sitting one afternoon on their 3-legged stools before the fire when there came a great thump at the door. It was Peter, all white with snow, for he had had to fight his way through deep snowdrifts. He had been determined, however, to climb up to the hut, for it was a week now since he had seen Heidi. "Good evening," he said as he came in. Then he went and placed himself as near the fire as he could, his whole face beaming with pleasure at finding himself there. Heidi looked on in astonishment, for Peter was beginning to thaw all over with the warmth, so that he had the appearance of a trickling waterfall.
"Well, General, how goes it with you?" said the grandfather. "Now that you have lost your army, you will have to turn to your pen and pencil."
"Why must he turn to his pen and pencil?" asked Heidi immediately, full of curiosity.
"During the winter he must go to school," explained her grandfather, "and learn how to read and write. It's a bit hard, although useful sometimes afterwards. Am I not right, General?"
"Yes, indeed," assented Peter. Heidi's interest was now thoroughly awakened, and she had so many questions to ask Peter about school, and conversation took so long that he had time to get thoroughly dry.
"Well now, General, you have been under fire for some time and must want some refreshment. Come and join us,"
said the grandfather, as he brought the supper out of the cupboard, and Heidi pushed the stools to the table. There was also now a bench fastened against the wall, for as he was no longer alone, the grandfather had put up seats of various kinds here and there, long enough to hold 2 persons, for Heidi had a way of always keeping close to her grandfather, whether he was walking, sitting, or standing. Peter opened his round eyes very wide when he saw what a large piece of meat Uncle gave him on his thick slice of bread. It was a long time since Peter had had anything so nice to eat. As soon as the pleasant meal was over, he began to get ready for returning home, for it was already growing dark. He had said his good night and his thanks, and was just going out when he turned and said, "I shall come again next Sunday, this day week, and my grandmother sent word that she would like you to come and see her some day." It was quite a new idea to Heidi that she should go and pay anybody a visit, and she could not get it out of her head. So the first thing she said to her grandfather the next day was, "I must go down to see the grandmother today. She will be expecting me."
"The snow is too deep,"
answered the grandfather, trying to put her off. Not a day passed, but what she said 5 or 6 times to her grandfather. "I must certainly go today. The grandmother will be waiting for me." On the 4th day, when Heidi was sitting on her high stool at dinner with the bright sun shining in upon her through the window, she again repeated her little speech. "I must certainly go down to see the grandmother today, or else I shall keep her waiting too long." The grandfather rose from the table, climbed up to the hayloft, and brought down the thick sack that was Heidi's coverlid, and said, "Come along, then." The child skipped out gleefully after him into the glittering world of snow. The old fir trees were standing now quite silent, their branches covered with the white snow, and they looked so lovely as they glittered and sparkled in the sunlight that Heidi jumped for joy at the sight and kept on calling out, come here, grandfather. The fir trees are all silver and gold." The grandfather had gone into the shed, and he now came out dragging a large hand sleigh. Inside there was a low seat, and the sleigh could be pushed forward and guided by the feet of the one who sat upon it with the help of a pole that was fastened to the side. The old man got in and lifted the child onto his lap. Then he wrapped her up in the sack, that she might keep nice and warm, and put his left arm closely round her, for it was necessary to hold her tight during the coming journey. He now grasped the pole with his right hand and gave the sleigh a push forward with his 2 feet. It shot down the mountainside with such rapidity that Heidi thought they were flying through the air like a bird, and shouted aloud with delight. Suddenly they came to a standstill, and there they were at Peter's hut. Her grandfather lifted her out and unwrapped her.
There you are. Now go in, and when it begins to grow dark, you must start on your way home again.
Then he left her and went up the mountain, pulling his sleigh after him. Heidi opened the door of the hut and stepped into a tiny room that looked very dark, with a fireplace and a few dishes on a wooden shelf. This was the little kitchen. She opened another door and found herself in another small room, for the place was not a herdsman's hut like her grandfather's, with one large room on the ground floor and a hay loft above, but a very old cottage, where everything was narrow and poor and shabby. A table was close to the door, and as Heidi stepped in, she saw a woman sitting on it, putting a patch on a waistcoat which Heidi recognized at once at Peter's. In the corner sat an old woman, bent with age, spinning. Heidi was quite sure this was the grandmother, so she went up to the spinning wheel and said, "Good day, grandmother. I've come at last. Did you think I was a long time coming?" The old woman raised her head and felt for the hand that the child held out to her, and when she had found it, she passed her own over it thoughtfully for a few seconds, and then said, "Are you the child who lives up with our uncle? Are you Heidi?" "Yes, yes," answered Heidi. "I've just come down in the sleigh with grandfather." "Is it possible? Why, your hands are quite warm. Brigitte, did our uncle come himself with the child?" Peter's mother had left her work and risen from the table, and now stood looking at Heidi with curiosity, scanning her from head to foot. "I do not know, mother, whether uncle came himself. It is hardly likely. The child probably makes a mistake." But Heidi looked steadily at the woman and said, "I know quite well who wrapped me up in my bed cover and brought me down in the sleigh. It was grandfather." There was some truth then, perhaps, in what Peter used to tell us of our uncle during the summer, when we thought he must be wrong, said grandmother. But who would ever have believed that such a thing was possible? I did not think the child would live 3 weeks up there. What is she like, Brigitte?" The latter had so thoroughly examined Heidi on all sides that she was well able to describe her to her mother. Heidi, meanwhile, had not been idle. She had made the round of the room and looked carefully at everything there was to be seen. All of a sudden she exclaimed, "Grandmother, one of your shutters is flapping backwards and forwards. Grandfather would put a nail in and make it all right in a minute. It'll break one of the panes some day. Look how it keeps on banging." "Ah, dear child," said the old woman, "I am not able to see it, but I can hear that and many other things besides the shutter. Everything about the place rattles and creaks when the wind is blowing, and it gets inside through all the cracks and holes. The house is going to pieces, and in the night, when the 2 others are asleep, I often lie awake in fear and trembling, thinking that the whole place will give way and fall and kill us. And there is not a creature to mend anything for us, for Peter does not understand such work." "But why cannot you see, grandmother, that the shutter is loose? Look, there it goes again. See, that one there?" And Heidi pointed to the particular shutter. "Alas, child, I can see nothing, nothing," said the grandmother in a voice of lamentation. "But if I were to go outside and put back the shutter so that you had more light, then you could see, grandmother." "No, no, not even then. No one can make it light for me again." "But If you were to go outside among all the white snow, then surely you would find it light. Just come with me, grandmother, and I will show you." Heidi took hold of the old woman's hand to lead her along, for she was beginning to feel quite distressed at the thought of her being without light. "Let me be, dear child. It is always dark for me now, whether in snow or sun. It will never be light for me again on earth, never." At these words, Heidi broke into loud crying. In her distress, she kept on sobbing out, "Who can make it light for you again? Can no one do it? Isn't there anyone who can do it?" The grandmother now tried to comfort the child, but it was not easy to quiet her. Heidi did not often weep, but when she did, she could not get over her trouble for a long while. At last, the old woman said, "Dear Heidi, you cannot think how glad I am to hear a kind word when I can no longer see. And it is such a pleasure to me to listen to you while you talk. So come and sit beside me and tell me what you do up there and how grandfather occupies himself. I knew him very well in the old days, but for many years now I have heard nothing of him except through Peter, who never says much." This was a new and happy idea to Heidi. She quickly dried her tears and said in a comforting voice, "Wait, grandmother, till I have told grandfather everything. He will make it light for you again, I'm sure, and will do something so that the house will not fall. He will put everything right for you." Heidi now began to give a lively description of her life with her grandfather, and of the days she spent on the mountain with the goats, and then went on to tell what she did during the winter, and how her grandfather was able to make all sorts of things, seats and stools and mangers where the hay was put for little Swan and little Bear, besides a new large water tub for her to bathe in when the summer came, and a new milk bowl and spoon. The grandmother listened with the greatest attention, only from time to time addressing her daughter. "Do you hear that, Brigitte? Do you hear what she is saying about uncle?" The conversation was suddenly interrupted by a heavy thump on the door, and in marched Peter, who stood stock still, opening his eyes with astonishment when he caught sight of Heidi. Then his face beamed with smiles as she called out, "Good evening, Peter." "What? Is the boy back from school already?" exclaimed the grandmother in surprise. "I had not known an afternoon to pass so quickly as this one for years. How is the reading getting on, Peter?" "As usual," was Peter's answer. The old woman gave a little sigh. "Ah, well," she said, "I hoped you would have something different to tell me by this time, as you are going to be 12 years old this February." "What was it you hoped he would have to tell you?" asked Heidi, interested in all the grandmother said. "I mean that he ought to have learned to read a bit by now," continued the grandmother. "Up there on the shelf is an old prayer book with beautiful songs in it, which I have not heard for a long time and cannot now remember to repeat to myself. And I hoped that Peter would soon learn enough to be able to read one of them to me sometimes, but he finds it too difficult." Heidi now jumped up from her low chair and, holding out her hand hastily to the grandmother, said, "Good night, grandmother. It is getting dark. I must go home at once." And bidding good-bye to Peter and his mother, she went towards the door. But the grandmother called out in an anxious voice, "Wait, wait, Heidi. You must not go alone like that. Peter must go with you. Have you got something warm to put round your throat?" "I've not anything to put on," called back Heidi. "But I'm sure I shall not be cold." And with that she ran outside and went off at such a pace that Peter had difficulty in overtaking her. The children had taken but a few steps before they saw the grandfather coming down to meet them, and in another minute his long strides had brought him to their side. "That's right, Heidi, you have kept your word," said the grandfather, and then wrapping the sack firmly round her, he lifted her in his arms and strode off with her up the mountain. They had no sooner got inside the hut than Heidi at once began. "Grandfather, tomorrow we must take the hammer and the long nails and fasten grandmother's shutter, and drive in a lot more nails in the other places, for her house shakes and rattles all over."
"We must we? Who told you that?" asked her grandfather.
"Nobody told me, but I know it for all that," replied Heidi. "For everything is giving way, and when the grandmother cannot sleep, she lies trembling, for she thinks that every minute the house will fall down on their heads, and everything now is dark for grandmother, and she does not think anyone can make it light for her again. But you will be able to, I'm sure, grandfather. Tomorrow we must go and help her. We will, won't we, grandfather?" The child was clinging to the old man and looking up at him in trustful confidence. The grandfather looked down at Heidi for a while without speaking, and then said, "Yes, Heidi, we will do something to stop the rattling. At least we can do that. We will go down about it tomorrow." The child was skipping round the room for joy, crying out, "We shall go tomorrow, we shall go tomorrow." The grandfather kept his promise. On the following afternoon, he brought the sleigh out again, and as on the previous day, he set Heidi down on the door of the grandmother's hut and said, "Go in now, and when it grows dark, come out again." Then he put the sack in the sleigh and went round the house. Heidi had hardly opened the door and sprung into the room when the grandmother called out from her corner, "It's the child again! Here she comes!" Heidi ran to her and then quickly drew the little stool close up to the old woman, and seating herself upon it, began to tell and ask her all kinds of things. All at once came the sound of heavy blows against the wall of the hut, and grandmother gave such a start of alarm that she nearly upset the spinning wheel, and cried in a trembling voice, "Ah, my God! Now it is coming. The house is going to fall upon us." But Heidi caught her by the arm and said soothingly, "No, no, grandmother, do not be frightened. It is only grandfather with his hammer. He is mending up everything, so that you shan't have such fear and trouble." "Is it possible? Is it really possible? So the dear God has not forgotten us," exclaimed the grandmother. "Do you hear, Brigitte, what that noise is? Did you hear what the child says? Go outside, Brigitte, and if it is our uncle, tell him he must come inside a moment, that I may thank him." Brigitte went outside and found our uncle in the act of fastening some heavy pieces of new wood along the wall. She stepped up to him and said, "Good evening, uncle. Mother and I thank you for doing us such a kind service, and she would like to tell you herself how grateful she is. I do not know who else would have done it for us. We shall not forget your kindness, for I am sure—" "That will do," said the old man, interrupting her. "I know what you think of our uncle without your telling me. Go indoors again. I can find out for myself where the mending is wanted." Brigitte obeyed on the spot. Her uncle had a way with him that made few people care to oppose his will. He went on knocking with his hammer all round the house, and then mounted the narrow steps to the roof and hammered away there until he had used up all the nails he had brought with him. Meanwhile it had been growing dark, and he had hardly come down from the roof and dragged the sleigh out from behind the goat shed when Heidi appeared outside. The grandfather wrapped her up and took her in his arms as he had done the day before, for although he had to drag the sleigh up the mountain after him, he feared that if the child sat in it alone, her wrappings would fall off and that she would be nearly, if not quite, frozen. So he carried her warm and safe in his arms. So the winter went by. After many years of joyless life, the blind grandmother had at last found something to make her happy. She listened for the little tripping footstep as soon as day had come, and when she heard the door open and knew the child was really there, she would call out, "God be thanked, she has come again." And Heidi had also grown very fond of the old grandmother, and when at last she knew for certain that no one could make it light for her again, she was overcome with sorrow. But the grandmother told her again that she felt the darkness much less when Heidi was with her, and so every fine winter's day the child came travelling down in her sleigh. The grandfather always took her, never raising any objection. Indeed, he always carried the hammer and sundry other things down in the sleigh with him, and many an afternoon was spent by him in making the goatherd's cottage sound and tight. It no longer groaned and rattled the whole night through, and the grandmother, who for many winters had not been able to sleep in peace as she did now, said she should never forget what the uncle had done for her. Chapter 5. A Railroad Journey. Heidi was now in her 8th year. She had learned all kinds of useful things from her grandfather. She knew how to look after the goats as well as anyone, and Little Swan and Little Bear would follow her like two faithful dogs and give a loud bleat of pleasure when they heard her voice. Twice during the course of this last winter, Peter had brought up a message from the schoolmaster at Durfley, who sent word to uncle that he ought to send Heidi to school, as she was over the usual age, and ought indeed to have gone the winter before. Uncle had sent word back each time that the schoolmaster would find him at home if he had anything he wished to say to him, but that he did not intend to send Heidi to school. As Heidi was running about one sunny March morning and had just jumped over the water trough for the 10th time at least, she nearly fell backwards into it with fright, for there in front of her stood an old gentleman dressed in black. When he saw how startled she was, he said in a kind voice, "Don't be afraid of me, for I am very fond of children. Shake hands. You must be the Heidi I have heard of. Where is your grandfather?" "He is sitting by the table making round wooden spoons," Heidi informed him as she opened the door. It was the old village pastor from Durfley, who had been a neighbor of Uncle's when he lived down there. He stepped inside the hut, and going up to the old man, who was bending over his work, said, "Good morning, neighbor." The grandfather looked up in surprise, and then rising said, "Good morning," in return. He pushed his chair towards the visitor as he continued, "If you do not mind a wooden seat, there is one for you." The pastor sat down. "It is a long time since I have seen you, neighbor," he said. "I think you know already what it is that has brought me here." And as he spoke, he looked towards the child who was standing at the door. "Heidi, go off to the goats," said her grandfather. "You can take them a little salt and stay with them till I come." Heidi vanished on the spot. "The child ought to have been at school a year ago, and most certainly this last winter," said the pastor. "The schoolmaster sent you word about it. But you gave him no answer. What are you thinking of doing with the child, neighbor?
I am thinking of not sending her to school,
was the answer. How are you going to let her grow up then?
I am going to let her grow up and be happy among the goats and birds. With them she is safe and will learn nothing evil.
But the child is not a goat or a bird. She is a human being. It is time she began her lessons. This is the last winter she must be allowed to run wild. Next winter, she must come regularly to school every day.
She will do no such thing,
said the old man with calm determination. Do you mean that you intend to stick obstinately to your decision? Said the pastor, growing somewhat angry. You have been about the world, and I should have given you credit for more sense, neighbor.
Indeed, replied the old man. Could you expect me to send a young child down the mountain on ice-cold mornings through storm and snow, and let her return at night when the wind is raging? Have you forgotten the child's mother, Adelaide? She was a sleepwalker and had fits. Might not the child be attacked in the same way if obliged to overexert herself? And you think you can come and force me to send her? I will go before all the courts of justice in the country, and then we shall see who will force me to do it.
Perhaps you are right, neighbor, said the pastor in a friendly tone of voice. If it is impossible to send the child to school from here, come down into Durfley and live again among your fellow men. What sort of life is this you lead, alone and with bitter thoughts towards God and man?
No, pastor. As to going down to Durfley to live, that is far from my thoughts. The people despise me, and I them. It is therefore best for all of us that we live apart.
The visitor had risen and stood holding out his hand to the old man, as he added with renewed earnestness, I will wager the next winter you will be down among us again, and we shall be good neighbors as of old. Promise me that you will come and live with us again and become reconciled to God and man. Our uncle gave the pastor his hand and answered him calmly and firmly.
You mean well by me, I know, but I will not send the child to school, nor come and live among you.
Then God help you, said the pastor, as he left the hut and went down the mountain. Our uncle was out of humor. When Heidi said as usual that afternoon, Can we go down to grandmother now? He answered,
Not today.
He did not speak again the whole day. And the following morning, when Heidi again asked the same question, he replied,
We will see.
But before the dinner bowls had been cleared away, another visitor arrived, and this time it was Dete. She wore a fine feathered hat and a long trailing dress which swept the floor. The grandfather looked her up and down without uttering a word. But Dete was prepared with an exceedingly amiable speech and began at once to praise the looks of the child. She should hardly have known her again, and it was evident that Heidi had been happy and well cared for with her grandfather. But she had just heard of something that would be a lucky chance for her. Some wealthy people in Frankfurt wanted a companion for their only daughter, who was an invalid. Heidi was just the sort of child they were looking for, simple-minded and unspoiled, and after Dete had given them a description of Heidi, they had agreed to take her. And no one could tell what good fortune that might be in store for her, for if these rich people should take a fancy to Heidi—
Have you nearly finished what you had to say?
broke in our uncle, who had allowed her to talk on uninterruptedly so far.
Ugh!
exclaimed Dete, throwing up her head in disgust. One would think I've been talking to you about the most ordinary matter. Why, there is not one person in all Portugal who would not thank God if I were to bring them such a piece of news as I am bringing you.
You may take your news to anybody you like. I will have nothing to do with it.
Dete leaped up from her seat like a rocket and cried, If that is all you have to say about it, why, then I will give you a bit of my mind. The child is now 8 years old and knows nothing, and you will not let her learn. You will not send her to church or school, as I was told down in Durfley, and she is my own sister's child. I am responsible for what happens to her, and this is a good opening for her. I have everybody in Durfley on my side. There is not one person there who will not take my part against you, and I advise you to think well before bringing it into court, if that is your intention. There are certain things which might be brought up against you that you would not care to hear, for when one has to do with law courts, there is a great deal raked up that had been forgotten.
Be silent,
thundered the uncle, and his eyes flashed with anger.
Go and be done with you, and never let me see you again with your hat and feather.
And with that he strode out of the hut. You have made grandfather angry, said Heidi, and her dark eyes had anything but a friendly expression in them as she looked at Dete. He will soon be all right again. Come now, said Dete hurriedly, and show me where your clothes are. I'm not coming, said Heidi. Come, you will have all sorts of good things that you never dreamed of. Then she went to the cupboard and taking out Heidi's things, rolled them up in a bundle. Come along now. There's your hat. It is very shabby, but will do for the present. Put it on and let us make haste off. I'm not coming, repeated Heidi. Don't be stupid and obstinate like a goat. I suppose it's from the goats you have learned to be so. Listen to me. You saw your grandfather was angry and heard what he said, that he did not wish to ever see us again. He wants you to go away with me, and you must not make him angrier still. You can't think how nice it is at Frankfurt, and if you do not like it, you can come back again. Your grandfather will be in a good humor by that time. Can I return at once and be back home again here this evening? Asked Heidi. What are you talking about? Come along now. I tell you that you can come back here when you like. Today we shall go as far as Mansfield, and early tomorrow we shall start in the train. It will bring you home again in no time when you wish it, for it goes as fast as the wind. They started down the mountain, and as they neared the grandmother's hut, they met Peter coming round the corner, carrying an immense bundle of long, thick hazel sticks on his shoulders. He stood still and stared at the two approaching figures. As they came up to him, he exclaimed, Where are you going, Heidi? I'm only just going over to Frankfurt for a little visit with Dete, she replied. But I must first run into grandmother. She will be expecting me. No, you must not stop to talk. It is already too late, said Dete, holding Heidi, who was struggling to get away. You can go when you come back. And she pulled the child on with her. Peter ran into the hut and banged against the table with his bundle of sticks with such violence that everything in the room shook, and his grandmother leaped up with a cry of alarm from her spinning wheel. What is the matter? What is the matter? Cried the frightened old woman. She is taking Heidi away, explained Peter. Who? Where to, Peter? Where to? Asked the grandmother, growing still more agitated. But even as she spoke, she guessed what had happened, for Brigitta had told her shortly before that she had seen Dete going up to Almunkel. The old woman opened the window and called out beseechingly, Dete, do not take the child away from us. Do not take her away. The two who were hastening down the mountain heard her voice, and Dete evidently caught the words, for she grasped Heidi's hand more firmly. Heidi struggled to get free, crying, Grandmother is calling, I must go to her. But Dete had no intention of letting the child go, and quieted her as best she could by promising that she could take something nice back to grandmother. This was a new idea to Heidi, and it pleased her so much that Dete had no longer any difficulty in getting her along. What could I take back to her? Heidi asked. A soft roll of white bread. She would enjoy that, for now she is old. She can hardly eat the hard black bread, answered Dede. Yes, she always gives it back to Peter, telling him it is too hard, affirmed Heidi. Do let us make haste, for then perhaps we can get back soon from Frankfurt, and I shall be able to give her the white bread today. And Heidi started off running so fast that Dede, with the bundle under her arm, could scarcely keep up with her. From that day forward, Armangel looked fiercer and more forbidding than ever when he came down and passed through Durfey. He spoke to no one, and looked such an ogre as he came along with his pack of cheeses on his back, his immense stick in his hand, and his thick frowning eyebrows, that the women would call to their little ones, Take care! Get out of Armangel's way, or he may hurt you. The old man took no notice of anybody as he strode through the village on his way to the valley below, where he sold his cheeses and bought what bread and meat he wanted for himself. After he had passed, the villagers all crowded together looking after him. They agreed that it was a great mercy the child had got away from him. Only the blind grandmother would have nothing to say against him, and told those who came to bring her work how kind and thoughtful he had been with the child, how good to her and her daughter, and how many afternoons he had spent mending the house. All this was repeated down in Durfey. But most of the people who heard it said that grandmother was too old to understand, and very likely had not heard rightly what was said. As she was blind, probably she was also deaf. Chapter 6. Clara, the patient little invalid. In her home at Frankfurt, Clara, the little daughter of Mr. Sisselman, was lying on the invalid couch on which she spent her whole day, being wheeled in it from room to room. Her little face was thin and pale, and at this moment her two soft blue eyes were fixed on the clock, which seemed to her to go very slowly this day, and with a slight accent of impatience, which was very rare with her, she asked, Isn't it time yet, Miss Rottenmeier? This lady was sitting very upright at a small work table, busy with her embroidery. She wore a dome-shaped headpiece, which made her look very solemn and dignified. For many years past, since Clara's mother had died, the housekeeping and the superintendence of the servants had been entrusted to Miss Rottenmeier. The father, who was often away from home, left her in sole charge, with the condition only that his little daughter should have a voice in all matters, and that nothing should be done against her wish. As Clara was putting her impatient question for the second time, Dete and Heidi arrived at the front door. Tinette, the lady in dainty cap and apron, ushered them upstairs into the library. Dede remained standing politely near the door, still holding Heidi tightly by the hand, for she did not know what the child might take it into her head to do amid these new surroundings. Miss Rottenmeier rose slowly and went up to the little new companion for the daughter of the house, to see what she was like. She did not seem very pleased with her appearance. Heidi was dressed in a plain little woolen frock, and her hat was an old straw one bent out of shape. The child looked innocently out from beneath it, gazing with unconcealed astonishment at the lady's towering headdress. "What is your name?" asked Miss Rottenmeier, after examining the child for some minutes, while Heidi in return kept her eyes steadily fixed upon the lady. "Heidi," she answered in a clear, ringing voice. What? What? That's no Christian name for a child. You are not christened that. What name did they give you when you were baptized?" continued Miss Rottenmeier. "I do not remember," replied Heidi. "What a way to answer," said the lady, shaking her head. "Dete, is the child a simpleton or only saucy?" "If the lady will allow me, I will speak for the child, for she is very unaccustomed to strangers," said Dede, who had given Heidi a silent poke for making such an unsuitable answer. She is certainly not stupid, nor yet saucy. She speaks exactly as she thinks. This is the first time she has ever been in a gentleman's house, and she does not know good manners. But she is very willing to learn. She was christened Adelaide after her mother, my sister, who is now dead. Well, that's a name that one can pronounce, remarked Miss Rottenmeier. But I must tell you, Dede, that I am astonished to see so young a child. I told you that I wanted a companion of the same age as the young lady of the house, one who could share her lessons and all her other occupations. Miss Clara is now over 12. What age is this child? If the lady will allow me, began Dede again, in her usual fluent manner. I myself lost count of her exact age. She is certainly a little younger, but not much. I cannot say precisely, but I think she is 10 or thereabouts. Grandfather told me I was 8, put in Heidi. Dede gave her another poke. But as the child had not the least idea why she did so, she was not at all confused. What? Only 8? Cried Miss Rottenmeier angrily. 4 years too young. Of what use is such a child? And what have you learned? What books did you have to learn from? None, said Heidi. How? What? How then did you learn to read? Continued the lady. I've never learned to read, or Peter either, Heidi informed her. Mercy upon us! You do not know how to read. Is it really so? Exclaimed Miss Rottenmeier, greatly horrified. Is it possible? Not able to read? What have you learned then? Nothing, said Heidi with unflinching truthfulness. Young woman, said the lady to Dede, this is not at all the sort of companion we want. How could you think of bringing me a child like this? But Dede was not to be put down so easily, and answered warmly. If you will allow me, the child is exactly what I thought you required. She is unlike all other children, and I thought this child seemed as if made for the place. But I must go now, for my mistress will be waiting for me. If you will permit, I will come again soon and see how she is getting on. And with a bow, Dede quickly left the room and ran downstairs. Miss Rottenmeier stood for a moment taken aback, and then ran after Dede. But she had disappeared out the front door. Heidi remained where she had been standing since she first came in. Clara had looked on during the interview without speaking. Now she beckoned to Heidi and said, Come here. Heidi went up to her. Would you rather be called Heidi or Adelaide? Asked Clara. I'm never called anything but Heidi, was the child's prompt answer. Then I shall always call you by that name, said Clara. It suits you. I've never heard it before, but neither have I ever seen a child like you before. Have you always had that short curly hair? Yes, I think so, said Heidi. Are you pleased to come to Frankfurt? Went on Clara. No, but I shall go home again tomorrow and take grandmother a white loaf, explained Heidi. Well, you are a funny child, exclaimed Clara. Don't you know you were sent for to come here and stay with me and share my lessons? They are dreadfully dull, and I think the morning will never pass away. My tutor comes every morning at about 10 o'clock, and then we go on with lessons till 2. And it does seem such a long time. Sometimes he takes up the book and holds it close up to his face, as if he were very short-sighted. But I know it's only because he wants to gape. And Miss Rottenmeier takes a large handkerchief out also now and then and covers her face with it, as if she were moved by what we had been reading. But that is only because she is longing to gape too. And I myself often want to gape. But I dare not, for if Miss Rottenmeier sees me gaping, she runs off at once and fetches the cod-liver oil and says I must have a dose, as I am getting weak again, and the cod-liver oil is horrible. But now it will be much more amusing, for I shall be able to lie back and listen while you learn to read." Heidi shook her head doubtfully when she heard of learning to read. "Oh, nonsense, Heidi. Of course you must learn to read. Everybody must. And my tutor is very kind and never cross, and he will explain everything to you. But mind, when he explains anything to you, you won't be able to understand. But don't ask any questions, or else he will go on explaining and you will understand less than ever. Later, when you have learnt more and know about things yourself, then you will begin to understand what he meant." Miss Rottenmeier now came back into the room. She had not been able to overtake Dede and was evidently very much put out. She walked backwards and forwards in a state of agitation between the study and the dining room and began scolding the butler.
"Make haste, Sebastian, or we shall get no dinner today at all," she said. Then hurrying out, she called to Tinette to see that the bedroom was prepared for the little girl who had just arrived. Meanwhile, Sebastian had flung open the folding doors leading into the dining room with rather more noise than he need, for he was feeling cross, although he did not dare answer back when Miss Rottenmeier spoke to him. He went up to Clara's chair to wheel her into the next room. Heidi stood staring at him. Seeing her eyes fixed upon him, he suddenly growled out, "Well, what is there in me to stare at like that?" Which he would certainly not have done if he had been aware that Miss Rottenmeier was just then entering the room. "You look so like Peter," answered Heidi. The housekeeper clasped her hands in horror. "Is it possible?" she stammered, half aloud. "She is now addressing the servant as if he were a friend. I never could have imagined such a child." Sebastian wheeled the couch into the dining room and helped Clara onto her chair. Miss Rottenmeier took the seat beside her and made a sign to Heidi to take the one opposite. Beside Heidi's plate lay a nice white roll, and her eyes lighted up with pleasure as she saw it. When Sebastian came up to her side and handed her the dish of fish, she looked at the roll and asked, "Can I have it?" Sebastian nodded, and Heidi immediately seized the roll and put it in her pocket. Sebastian still remained standing beside Heidi. It was not his duty to speak, nor to move away until she had helped herself. Heidi looked wonderingly at him for a minute or two, and then said, "Am I to eat some of that too?" Sebastian nodded again. "Give me some then," she said, looking calmly at her plate. "I see. I shall have to teach you the first rules of behavior," said the housekeeper with a sigh. "You must not speak to Sebastian at table or at any other time unless you have an order to give him. And then you are not to address him as if he was someone belonging to you. Never let me hear you speak to him in that way again. It is the same with Trinette, and for myself, you are to address me as you hear others doing. Clara must herself decide what you are to call her." "Why, Clara, of course," put in the latter. Then followed a long list of rules as to general behavior, during the course of which Heidi's eyes gradually closed, for she had been up before 5 o'clock that morning and had had a long journey. She leaned back in her chair and fell fast asleep. Miss Rottenmeier, having at last come to the end of her lecture, said, "Now remember what I have said, Adelaide. Have you understood it all?" "Heidi has been asleep for ever so long," said Clara, her face rippling all over with amusement, for she had not had such an entertaining dinner for a long time. "It is really insupportable what one has to go through with this child," exclaimed Miss Rottenmeier in great indignation, and she rang the bell so violently that Trinette and Sebastian both came running in, but no noise was sufficient to wake Heidi, and it was with difficulty that they roused her sufficiently to get her to her bedroom. As the long journey ends, we close our book for today on the end of chapter 6. Far away from her fresh mountain air, our little Heidi has fallen fast asleep,
right in her dining chair, completely exhausted by the endless rules of her new city life. If joining Heidi on this new chapter brought a sense of peace to your weekend, please take a moment to leave a like on my video. Sharing the story with others helps our quiet reading community to grow, and subscribing ensures you never miss an episode. Next Sunday at 12 noon, we discover how Heidi handles life inside Clara's massive house and the trouble she causes when she tries to find a window just to catch a glimpse of the mountains. So turn on your notification bell so we can read that together. Thank you for listening. Come back to hear me again. Till then, take care and bye-bye.